Sammy Spider's First Shavout, written by Sylvia A. Rouss. On a warm afternoon near the end of spring, Sammy Spider and his mother were snuggled in their web on the Shapiro's kitchen ceiling. Sammy glanced down and noticed Mrs. Shapiro carefully measuring a cupful of flour. "What is Mrs. Shapiro doing?" Sammy asked. "She is following a recipe for making blintzes. She will serve them this evening when the holiday of Shavout begins." "What's a recipe?" Sammy asked. "It's a list of instructions," Mrs. Spider answered. First, she measured the flour. Then she added the eggs. Now she is mixing in some milk. "What is Mrs. Shapiro doing now?" Sammy asked. First, she made thin pancakes. Then she put a spoonful of cheese filling in the middle of each one. Now she is rolling them up to make the blintzes, responded Mrs. Spider. "Can we make some blintzes for Shavout?" pleaded Sammy. "Silly little Sammy. Spiders don't celebrate Shavout. Spiders spin webs," replied his mother. Sammy lowered himself on a strand of webbing. He watched Mrs. Shapiro ladle some mixture into a frying pan. Suddenly, a drop of hot oil splattered upward and barely missed Sammy, who scurried back up his web. "Phew! That was close," sighed Mrs. Spider. Sammy looked down and saw Mr. Shapiro at the sink. "What is Mr. Shapiro doing?" he asked his mother. "First, he washed the berries," she said. "Then he sliced them. Now he is mixing them with sugar." "Shavout celebrates the first fruits of spring," explained Mrs. Spider. "Mr. Shapiro is preparing strawberry topping for the blintzes." Sammy lowered himself as Mr. Shapiro sliced into a fat, juicy strawberry. The juice splashed up into Sammy's startled face. "Yummy!" said Sammy, licking the sweet juice. He climbed back towards his mother. "Would you like a taste?" he offered. "Silly little Sammy," grinned Mrs. Spider. "Spiders don't eat strawberries. Spiders spin webs." Just then Josh burst into the kitchen carrying a small object. "Is that a blintz?" asked Sammy. "No," laughed Mrs. Spider. "It's a little Torah scroll Josh got at Hebrew school. It's like the large Torah scrolls that are read in synagogue on Shabbat and the holidays." "Shavout celebrates the time when God gave the Torah to Moses," Mrs. Spider explained. "First, Moses taught it to the Jewish people. Then they taught it to their children. Now it continues. Josh is learning Torah from his parents, the way they learned it from theirs." "What is it about?" asked Sammy. "The Torah tells the story of the Jewish people. It also has rules about how to treat others with love, kindness, and respect," said Mrs. Spider. "Is it a recipe for living?" questioned Sammy thoughtfully. "That's a good way to describe it," agreed Mrs. Spider. Josh gently placed the little scroll on the table next to a vase filled with fresh flowers. "The blintzes smell delicious," he said. "May I try one?" "First, I want you to take a plate of blintzes to our new neighbors," his mother said. "Then come back, wash your hands, and you may have a blintz." Eager to get a closer look at the little Torah, Sammy zoomed down and landed right in the middle of the flowers. "Achoo!" he sneezed. A fine green yellow powder covered him from head to feet. Startled, he darted back to his web. Mrs. Spider chuckled as she dusted the yellow powder off of her sneezing little Sammy. "You've had quite a day. First, you were nearly splattered with oil. Then you got splashed with strawberry juice. Now you are covered in pollen. You must be tired." "Mother, I think I know a spider's recipe for living," he said, yawning. "First, let's get you ready for bed," said Mrs. Spider. "Then you can tell me what you've learned." Mrs. Spider tucked Sammy into his web. He whispered something in her ear. "You're right, little Sammy," Mrs. Spider said. "Now let's say it together. Spiders spin webs." Mrs. Shapiro's Blintz recipe.